Please don't forget the money, man.
All my blessings, 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 all my blessings.
I need my blessings every penny, daily counting every single one I'm seeing.
All right, Saturday, October 8th, the first college football Saturday on the October slate. Now, we don't have really as many exciting matchups. A few games like the Red River rivalry and the Texas A&M Alabama game have lost their luster a little bit, but should still be a very interesting slate with a lot of, teams kind of coming up out of nowhere that'll be entertaining. So an entertaining slate altogether, but perhaps not a lot of big upsets on the horizon for this week. Starting with the noon slate, we will have number 8 Tennessee at number 5 LSU. Tennessee's undefeated at 4-0. LSU's 4-1. This is on ESPN, one of the bigger games on the slate. The Vols are 3-point favorites on the road right now with a 63.5 over-under. Death Valley is obviously going to be a very tough place to play, but the Vols have had 2 weeks now to prepare for this game. They come out of the bye week with devastating news that Warren Burrell, who has already missed a good chunk of this season, will now be missing the year with an upper body injury. He's on the back end at the safety position. One of the top receivers, Cedric Tillman, had ankle surgery that will cost him some time. He missed the Florida game, in which they gave up 453 yards passing on the back end to Antonio Richardson there. And they're effectively now the worst passing defense in the SEC, but the number 1 offense. So they did miss both guys in that game. Now, LSU has been muting passing attacks, most notably Will Rogers at Mississippi State, holding him to 214 yards and a touchdown. But I'm not sure they're that great of a team, and it's surprising that they're literally one spot above Florida State in the rankings, being that both teams have one loss, and Florida State actually beat LSU. But here they are with a chance to move to 5-1 over Tennessee. I don't think that they will, but this is still one of the top matchups on the map here. Now, Jaden Daniels is not going to push the ball down the field. He's not been really effective at doing that for the Tigers. He is a threat to Scooby-Doo and kind of scamper around there, and it's always entertaining to watch, but I'm not sure if they'll quite put up enough points on this susceptible Tennessee defense, and we'll see if they're able to move the ball still with Tillman out. Again, this is the big SEC noon ESPN game, LSU and Tennessee. Also, in the noon slot here, my personal favorite watch is going to be number 17 Tennessee at 4-0, heading to number 9 Kansas, who's 5-0 on FS1. TCU is a touchdown favorite on the road after decimating Oklahoma's defense last week, including scoring on 7 of 9 possessions at one point. The over-under 67.5 points. We expect to see quite a few here. Kansas' strength relies on their quarterback position, of course, in Jalen Daniels, not to be confused with Jaden Daniels of LSU. Now, he is completing 68% of his passes. He has 11 touchdowns, 1 pick on the year, and he's also a mobile threat, one of the best in the country, 329 yards on the ground at over 7 yards per clip, and 5 rushing touchdowns. Again, the defense is not the strength here for Kansas, which is why TCU, and the number 2 offense in the country right now, is projected to go on the road and win here. Max Duggan at quarterback has looked excellent there after rebolting down the quarterback position, and this should be, again, high-flying scoring game, 2 great quarterbacks, great offense all the way around, and expect a great game here. I think TCU is going to be the better football team. They have better pieces on the defensive end, but again, I think this is going to be one of the top watches of the entire week. Speaking of good stories, Mississippi State is ranked number 23. They are 4-1. They are hosting Arkansas, who's now 3-2. Again, this is the noon slot. This is the SEC Network game. Will Rogers and this Bulldogs team looks really good. Mike Leach has been building this team since he took the job in 2020. And this is a solid roster on both sides of the football. The passing attack is elite. This is just going to be an excellent group. Now for Arkansas, KJ Jefferson, I think he'll be ready to go for this game. There were reports that he had to practice on Wednesday, which he did in order to possibly be a participant after getting knocked around against Alabama. I assume he'll be lined up to play. If he doesn't play, I don't think they have any shot here. The backup quarterback is a senior, but doesn't have a whole lot of experience. And again, Jefferson's mobile ability really makes this kind of option offense roll. Will Rogers for the Bulldogs has over 1,700 yards and 19 touchdowns, top 5 in the country in both categories, and it's really shaping up for this team finally to kind of make a run here in SEC play, although they're in a very brutal division here. At Kentucky, at Alabama are next up on the slate before they're home for struggling Auburn. Then they welcome in Georgia before playing their usual non-conference cupcake in ETSU, which I believe is East Tennessee University, and they wrap up with the Egg Bowl where they travel to their rival Ole Miss. So a brutal schedule. Again, 3 away games still, Kentucky, Alabama, and Ole Miss, and a home game to Georgia. But a big win against Arkansas here would really help the Bulldogs and their continuing push here to continue to evolve under Mike Leach. Now, Arkansas, on the other hand, expected to be a really solid football team, bringing back a great quarterback and great pieces. The defense is still struggling, and losing your star quarterback would not be real great. Now, at BYU is the next game on the slate, followed by at Auburn. They still have LSU on the schedule and Ole Miss. A little bit easier slate, all things considered. Liberty's tucked in there. This Missouri team, which might actually have a good defense, it's on the road still. They have a much easier path if they're able to kind of get the pieces back together, but certainly not looking like the second or even third best team in the SEC West right now. They might settle towards the bottom along with this Auburn team. On the other hand, if Jefferson is able to come back for this game and they're able to sustain some drives, put some offense together, get some pressure on Will Rogers, it's one thing they're still able to do is sack the quarterback and get a pass rush together and pull the win out here on the road. That would be big for the Razorbacks on the other foot. Regardless, it'll be a good game. It looks like the line just moved recently, pushing towards 10 points Mississippi State's way, so maybe that's bad news for Jefferson. But that's the noon SEC game, Arkansas at Mississippi State. Staying in that same window, one of the big hyped games, of course, the Red River rivalry. I bumped this down to kind of my mid-tier games to check on. Texas and Oklahoma are both 3-2 now. And it's a touchdown favorite going Texas's way. This will be played in the Cotton Bowl in Dallas. Now, Oklahoma has won 7 of the past 10 games, including a comeback win last season where projected Heisman winner Spencer Rattler was benched in favor of potentially future winner Caleb Williams, who's, of course, now at USC there. And that's where he first burst onto the scene, brought them down from 3 touchdowns to win that game in a shootout. And in 2020, Oklahoma won the game in 4 overtimes behind Spencer Rattler. This will be the first time that Texas is favored in the game in over a decade, since 2009, I believe the number is. Now, Texas is expected to have Quentin Ewers back for this game. It is not a surefire thing, but that is rumored to be why he was held out of last week's game against West Virginia, in which Texas hammered the Mountaineers, which are not a bad football team in their own right. But Hudson Carr is not quite the firepower that Quentin Ewers is, despite the fact that we've only seen Ewers on the field for about 6 real quarters of football at this point. On the other hand, Oklahoma, Dylan Gabriel is still going through concussion protocol after getting popped in the TCU game last week. He's not expected to play. We'll see if we get General Booty, the reserve quarterback, or someone else there for Oklahoma. We are so close to getting a player with one of the best names in college football on the field, but last week Davis Bevel hit the field when Gabriel went out, and he was 9 for 18 before getting hit and banged up a little bit as well. So we'll see if we finally get some booty on the field in this game. It's going to be a fun watch, but it's going to be a tough watch. Neither of these teams look like they're going to be winning the Big 12 at this moment. It's possible when Quentin Ewers comes back for Texas, he's able to open up the offense. Bijan Robinson will have less guys stacking the box. But again, the Big 12 right now looks like TCU's opened things up a little bit. Oklahoma State, you still have to go through Baylor. And the Texas Tech loss was not great for this team. But, man, Oklahoma right now looks like they could lose 5-6 games. So it's not a good football team on that end. So this is going to be entertaining football. I'm not sure that it'll be really good football. I'm not sure that it'll be real meaningful football in the long term as far as teams that make it to, obviously, playoffs or big bowl games or New Year's Day bowl games. But it should be a game that is, of course, big in stature, in historical significance, and has future NFL players on board, but is not the must-watch game that it was projected to be in the preseason, or even a few weeks back when we saw Texas in a close game with Alabama and when Oklahoma was still undefeated. And the last game I have here in kind of the middle tier games is Maryland at 4-1. They'll be hosting Purdue at 3-2. On the Big Ten Network at noon. Maryland is a field goal favorite right now, and both of these look like really good Big Ten teams, pretty good Big Ten teams, I should say, making it kind of the middle tier in a league that has a lot of bad in it right now. Tulia Tagovailoa for Maryland, currently completing 75% of his passes, over 1,400 yards. They beat Michigan State 27-13 last week, and of course stayed close with Michigan in a game that I felt like they could have possibly won, and just a couple plays went differently in that one. They beat SMU as well. This seems to be a team that can kind of hang with pretty much anyone. Purdue had a close game with Penn State that they lost, close game with Syracuse they lost, a close game with Florida Atlantic that they won, then they beat Minnesota last week in a turnover fest. Should be a good football game between two teams that are very much built and revolve around their quarterbacks to win football games, although both defenses have been pretty prepared and look pretty solid this year as well. Finally, the last few notable games worth mentioning in the noon slate. Number 4, Michigan at 5-0. They'll be traveling to Indiana. The Hoosiers are 3-2. This is on Fox. Michigan's heavily favored and really needs to put the hammer down here in this road game. Get a nice pass rush going. Get J.J. McCarthy moving the ball down the football field. And Indiana's going to try everything to disrupt that, but this is not a real great football team, all things considered. Missouri is 2-3. They're playing at Florida. The Gators are 3-2. This is on ESPNU. Now, Florida smashed Eastern Washington 52-17 last week. Anthony Richardson was only 8 for 10 passing, but it was for 240 yards, a touchdown, and a pick. John Kitna's son, Jalen Kitna, took over at quarterback when the game was in hand. He was 8 for 12 for 152 and a touchdown. Now, the Gators have to fend off this pesky Missouri team that pushed Georgia last week, and we'll see if they're able to put them down. The defense might be okay, the Missouri Tigers, and you kind of have to wonder if they weren't a couple plays away from beating Georgia and Auburn and actually sitting like a 4-1 record heading into Florida here, just how close they were to being a decent record-wise team. But yeah, they've certainly had their struggles. Florida's got their own problems. Anthony Richardson's still struggling a little bit at quarterback, and this will really be a year 2 Billy Napier job before the Gators are really on the map. So a little bit of interest here. That'll be happening. Missouri and Florida on ESPNU. Finally, struggling, Louisville at Virginia. Both teams are 2-3. This is the ACC network. Quarterback was supposed to be the strength of the ACC this season, and right now a guy that was supposed to be benched in DJ Ungley at Clemson is currently one of the strongest in the whole conference, while Malik Cunningham at Louisville and Brennan Armstrong at Virginia and Philip Jakovich, I believe it's pronounced, at Boston College are all on really bad football teams and have no say in the conference race at this point at all. Tyler Van Dyke at Miami was benched. We'll see if he stays the starter there. Lots of problems for what was supposed to be a nice quarterback happy league in the ACC. Lots of guys struggling. Two of them will be playing each other on the ACC network at noon. And right now, neither one has real strong NFL prospects. So, but that is a game that will be available to you on your television. All right, your afternoon slate. I've got this pared down to really two more high-profile games. But let's start at 2 o'clock as a notable. South Florida is 1-4. They're at number 24 Cincinnati. They're 4-1. This is on ESPN+. Just worth noting because Cincinnati has the best chance right now to make a New Year's 6 bowl game with only one loss. Of course, there's been a spattering at the non-Power 5 level by Power 5 teams and non-conference slate, so it's not a very good chance of any other team really making a run at this point for a New Year's 6 bowl. Coastal Carolina, James Madison, of course, still undefeated, but I think it'd really take some real movement by the pollsters to... They're not even in the top 25 at this point, so it'd really take some guts by the pollsters to get them even in there if they manage to keep winning. James Madison has the number 1 defense in the country right now, but we'll see what happens there. They do have a couple big games coming up on the road. SMU, who's now 2-3 after losing the Wednesday night game to Central Florida. Then they will play that Central Florida team 2 weeks from now on the road as well. So 2 big road games literally coming up here down the road for Cincinnati in upcoming weeks. At 3:30, the CBS game is going to be number 2 Georgia at 5-0, hosting Auburn at 3-2. Georgia's a massive 30-point favorite in this game with a 49-point over-under that puts a realistic expected final score around 40-10, which is exactly where we would have pinned it about 2 weeks ago. However, Georgia's been pissing around the past 2 weeks now, and Auburn slipped by Missouri in overtime and came up short against LSU in the past couple of games. So how far apart are these teams really at the moment? We keep expecting Georgia to get off the map with a lack of explosive talent at the receiver position, Stetson Bennett's less than impressive play, and replacing all but 1 or 2 players on that defensive side of the football seemed to be a little bit worrying. They gave up a lot of yards on the ground to Missouri, and I'm sure Auburn will be happy to exploit that. They're currently deciding between starting a quarterback that's thrown 4 times as many picks as touchdowns, or a guy who has an equal amount of each, but is only completing 54% of his passes. So, not sure if I can just pencil Georgia down to cover that spread. The real big game in the 3:30 time slot is on Fox. Number 11 Utah at 4-1 is heading to UCLA in the Rose Bowl. They're 5-0. They're ranked 18th. They beat their first quality team in Washington last weekend. Beat the life out of them 40-32. They're getting a lot of hype for their run game and their ability to shut down the run, but they haven't played a real good team that's been able to run the football as a prime focus of the offense. Washington was the number 1 passing team going into that game, led by Michael Penix, and they did not want to run the ball. So the fact that UCLA held them to about 60 yards rushing, I didn't think was that significant. We'll see what they're able to do against Utah, which will happily try to run the ball. The Utes, of course, took advantage of a number of turnovers by Oregon State last week and were able to blow them out in that game. Cam Rising still looks like a good quarterback, completing 68% of his passes, 13 touchdowns, 2 picks, 1,100 yards of offense. Tavon Thomas at running backs, averaging 4.4 yards per carry, which isn't top flight by any sense, but it's something. They're putting up 42 points per game. Now, this team isn't explosive on offense, and it's not one of the best defenses they've ever had either. So I don't think this is a national championship contending team. I think this is a team that can win the Pac-12. UCLA, on the other hand, I'm still not sure about. Dorian Thomas-Robinson has completed 74% of his passes, over 1,200 yards, 11 touchdowns, 1 pick. He's great on the ground, 223 yards and 3 touchdowns. Cat Burnett at running backs, 417 yards at 6.4 yards per carry and 5 touchdowns. And the defense is not impressive at all. It's kind of where they're lacking. So this should be a great game and another barometer to kind of see where these guys are at. Again, UCLA's best competition has been Washington, and the Utes was Florida at the beginning of the year on the road. They have beat San Diego State, Arizona State, and Oregon State, although all those teams have had their struggles as well. So it'll be great to see these two teams come face to face in a game that could be really meaningful for the Pac-12, which again is still playing out its schedules this year, its divisional schedules, but the best two teams record-wise will be playing in the conference championship game. So I will be watching this. This is a big game, 3:30 Fox for the Pac-12, and not quite the balance of that conference. There's a lot of teams still in the mix there, notably Oregon and USC, but this could be one of the big matchups to help decide who the two teams are that are going to go to the conference championship game there. The other game that I had as my top shelf watches is Texas Tech at 3-2 on the road to Oklahoma State, who's 4-0, ranked 7th. That is on FS1. This will be the other big game that I will be flipping to. Now, Oklahoma State's favored by 9.5 in this game with a massive 70-point over-under, so expecting a lot of points here. Donovan Smith, again, has been a roller coaster quarterback for Texas Tech, but he has the ability to put the ball in the air 50 times and put some yardage up. It's whether he'll make the plays that turn the ball over. Oklahoma State, can they take advantage of that? The defense is fine. I'm not sure it's certainly not the strength of the team with Spencer Sanders in this offense that seems to be high-flying, but Texas Tech has one of the better rush defenses in the country. And although Spencer Sanders has really been moving outside the pocket and running around a bit this year, that's added a new dimension to the offense for the Cowboys. If he's forced to throw the ball to really make plays on the Texas Tech Red Raider defense, that has not been where he's excelled his entire career there. That's where he's been more problematic. But he may be in luck because Adrian Martinez had 3 touchdowns and 171 yards rushing from the quarterback position against Texas Tech last week. And they had to pull it out in a 9-point victory, 37-28. We'll see if he's able to kind of replicate similar results. I'm kind of surprised this isn't a larger line, but I think that the Red Raiders really have some weapons and are a quality football team, even if they're not competing for the top of the Big 12 by the time we get towards the back half of the season. Staying in the 3:30 time slot here, East Carolina and Tulane out of the American. East Carolina's 3-2, Tulane is 4-1. This is on ESPNU. This is a mid-level game, a check-in for me. Now the Pirates, of course, had the close game with NC State. They really should have won earlier in the year. They beat South Florida, Campbell, Old Dominion. They lost to Navy, which is kind of shocking. Other than that, this team could be undefeated. It's not a bad Pirates team. They're certainly a squad that can still have some say in what happens in the American Conference. Holton Atlers at quarterback has over 1,500 yards passing, a 68% completion percentage, 15 touchdowns, and 3 interceptions. He is a solid quarterback that is not talked about enough in this conference, and he's got some solid receivers as well to throw the football to. So this is really a solid Pirates team that is not talked about at all on the national radar, and they're playing a team in the Green Wave that is one of the best defenses in the country. Number 1 in pass defense at 123.6 yards allowed a game. 9th best overall defense, and 10th in points per game. Now they've had some quarterback injuries, not sure who's going to be pitching the ball there, but that hasn't stopped them from winning football games, including a big one in overtime against Houston last week. Again, these are two teams in the same conference as Cincinnati and Central Florida and Houston. This is a very feisty conference. Not sure if Memphis is a quality team, but they're 4-1 in the mix there as well. SMU is now 2-3, and I think they're actually a pretty solid football team with a good offense. So despite the records there, they're about 7-8 solid teams in the American Conference. Temple might win a couple games as well. So keep an eye on the American Conference and this game as well. Let's run through a lot of lower level games here. 3:30, Wisconsin's 2-3. They're at Northwestern, who's 1-4 on the Big Ten Network. This is going to be a disgusting game, and I want no part of watching what's going on there. Can Wisconsin bounce back? They have so far this season against bad football teams and beat them, and Northwestern still winless in the United States. Virginia Tech is 2-3. They're at Pittsburgh, who's 3-2 on the ACC Network. Pitt's favored by more than 2 touchdowns with a 43-point over-under. That is disgusting. Now, Georgia Tech only had 102 yards passing last week and beat Pittsburgh. That was a big upset. Grant Wells, who transferred from Marshall into Virginia Tech last season, might put up comparable numbers, sadly. Hokies are only averaging 10.8 points per game. They only scored 10 last week against North Carolina's putrid defense. Pitt was 2 for 12 on third downs against Georgia Tech in that surprising loss. Had 3 turnovers, 2 fumbles. This is another gross game here, but again, some ranked teams that have fallen on hard times in Wisconsin and Pittsburgh. Middle Tennessee is 3-2. They're playing at UAB. That's a 2-2 team. Outside of 1-5 Charlotte, every team in Conference USA is basically within a game and a half of each other. UTSA and Western Kentucky, I think, are the best couple squads, but these two could be in the mix. Toledo is 3-2. They're at Northern Illinois, who's 1-4, and Kent State at 2-3 is at Miami of Ohio. They're 2-3. Both of these games are on ESPN+. Toledo, I think, is the best team in the MAC right now. Northern Illinois won it last year. They've had some injury issues, and Kent State and Miami of Ohio might be in the mix, but the MAC has been pretty gross this year. At 4 o'clock on ABC, number 3 Ohio State is 5-0. They'll be heading to East Lansing. The Spartans are 2-3, and Ohio State's favored by 26.5 points, and that is probably too low. Now, Ohio State struggled a bit with the defense of Rutgers last week, surprisingly. Kept the ball on the ground, blew them out of the game, and I think ended up covering the spread there. Yeah, too many weapons all over the place. Michigan State hasn't shown what's going on there, what they can do offensively, defensively, and just not a lot to say about this game when one team is competing for a national title and the other team is competing to finish 500. Staying in the 4 o'clock time slot we're in now, Pac-12 Network is squirreling away. Number 21 Washington, who's 4-1, traveling on the road to play Arizona State, who is 1-4. Now, Washington's favored by 2 touchdowns here. This is actually kind of a big game for them. Arizona State has nothing to lose at this point, playing for next season, playing to figure out who's going to be on the team, who's entering the transfer portal, who's the new coach going to be. It's just going to be a cluster, and they got to have a little bit of confidence after putting up a few points in the past few weeks against decent football teams. But Washington getting shredded by UCLA really brought them down to earth fast, I think. So they got to be careful not to get upset again here by a Sun Devil team that's going to just come out ready to exploit that defense and the problems it had to rattle Michael Penix, because when he plays bad, he's real bad. Speaking of teams with nothing to lose, Georgia Tech's 2-3 now, and their game's only worth noting because they're playing 4-1 Duke. They're playing host to that squad on ESPN3. Now, the Blue Devils have Riley Leonard at quarterback, completing 72% of his passes, over 1,100 yards. He's the driving force behind that team that's averaging 35 points per game. The only loss was to Kansas. Now, they beat Virginia last week 38-17, and they're going to try not to get surprised here by a Georgia Tech team, because that would be a hell of a story if Georgia Tech fires their coach, then moves to 500 for the first time at midseason point in a very long time. Of course, they beat Pitt last week, 26-21. Now, these last 2 games in the 4 o'clock slot are almost promotable to kind of middling games worth keeping an eye on and maybe flipping over to at some point. The first one is number 9 Ole Miss at 5-0, heading to Vanderbilt. The Vandies are 3-2. That's on the SEC network. They were not competitive in games against Alabama and Wake Forest, yet they still have a winning record, which is solid for them. I believe I missed the Kentucky Ole Miss recap in my earlier episode, but number 7 Kentucky was in a big fight against number 14 Ole Miss on the road last week, and the Wildcats had the ball in the red zone twice late, including the final minute, but they turned the ball over, fumbled it within a minute, and the turnover cost them the game 22-19. Kentucky's offensive line is still looking terrible. Ole Miss had a backup center in there, and Jackson Dart was catching strays all afternoon, basically. Didn't know where the ball was coming exactly as it was being snapped to him. So it was basically like a baseball batter waiting for a pitch. Curveball, fastball, where's it coming? He's just trying to get his hands on the football. He finished 15 for 29 with a pick. And the ground game had another 186, giving the Rebels 800 yards on the ground over the past 3 games, while Will Levis was 18 for 24 for 220 and 2 touchdowns. So I don't have a lot of faith in Kentucky, and I don't have a lot of faith in Ole Miss moving forward. I'm not sure where their placement is, even within their own division, with Mississippi State looking good. Alabama, obviously. Not sure about some of these other teams, LSU or Arkansas. I'll tell you they're better than Texas A&M. I'll tell you that for sure. But they'll be looking to blow out effectively on the road this Vanderbilt team, which is not being quality competition. It looks like Vandy of old, but it's possible coming off of 2 weeks rest and prep time that Vandy's able to kind of exploit this team. They're starting a true freshman quarterback over there that they switched to. I can't remember if it's Josh McCowan's son or not, but they got a new kid in there with 2 weeks prep time now. So it's possible that we could have a little feisty game in there for the Vandy Commodores. The other game, we are going to bump up to the middling level. A game you should keep an eye on. North Carolina's 4-1. They're at Miami, who's 2-2 on ESPN+. This game was a circle date on the calendar in the preseason, and it'll be entertaining now for different reasons. North Carolina's defense is god-awful, and Miami's looked horrific against Middle Tennessee 2 weeks ago. They're coming off a bye. With Tyler Van Dyke being benched, hopefully he'll be back in full force and still look like a solid football player back there, hopefully. Drake May, of course, will be ready to roll for North Carolina after beating Virginia Tech 41-10 last week. The Hokies could not take advantage of that horrible offense. Miami hopefully will, and hopefully they won't look as pathetic. But coming into the season, Tyler Van Dyke was supposed to be the next NFL prospect, and we didn't know what we were going to get with Drake May. As it stands now, Drake May looks excellent. He looks ready for the NFL, despite the fact that he'll have to hang out in college for another year, and we're not sure what's going on in Miami in general. But there should be points in this game. I think Miami's favored by a field goal right now, but this could be a weird, all-over-the-place kind of game. So keep an eye on North Carolina at Miami and ESPN2 at 4 o'clock. And the evening slate starts out at 6 o'clock with a good one. Western Kentucky's 3-2. They're heading to UTSA, who's also 3-2 team at this point. This game is on ESPN Plus, unfortunately. Now, these are probably 2 of the top teams in Conference USA at the moment. West Kentucky lost to Troy out of the Sun Belt last week, 34-27, and they did lose to Indiana, 33-30. They've beaten Austin Peay, Hawaii, Florida Atlantic, but Austin Reed, the former West Florida transfer, has 1,667 yards and 72% completion percentage with 17-4 touchdown interception ratio, and looks good taking over there, passing the football. Kyle Robichucks, I believe, something like that, is averaging over 6.7 yards per carry. When they do choose to run the football there, linebacker Jaquez Evans is a standout. This isn't quite the team it was last year under Bailey Zappi, but it's still a solid football team. Now, UTSA has lost to Texas and Houston in overtime. They've beaten Army, Texas Southern, and Middle Tennessee last week. Frank Harris, still the motor there that keeps the engine running. 1,700 yards passing with a 68% completion percentage, 12-5 touchdown interception ratio, still a force on the ground as well, 4 touchdowns rushing, and they're converting 55% of their third downs, so they don't come off the field very often. So I expect to see lots of points in this game between 2 big Conference USA teams that are certainly able to move the football in Western Kentucky and UTSA. 7 o'clock, should say 7:30, we've got a couple of big football games. BYU is ranked 16th. They're 4-1, and they're playing Notre Dame, who's 2-2. This is on NBC. I almost said that Notre Dame's hosting, but it's in Reliance Stadium in Las Vegas. We'll have alternate uniforms, and this should be a good one. Now, BYU is giving up points on the back end. The offense still looks good. Jaron Hill's completing 70% of his passes, over 1,400 yards, only 1 pick. The only turnover of the season for the Cougars. The Irish had 2 weeks to get ready for this game. Hopefully the offense is coming along a little bit. They beat North Carolina 45-32 last time out before hitting the break. So it's been almost a month of poor offense on the field, outside of the North Carolina game in the bye week. Maybe Drew Payne, who's the quarterback there, in Game 3 as a starter, will be able to exploit BYU's defense. They're currently a 3.5-point favorite. And again, this will be a nice big game. NBC will be hyping up this one. Alternate uniforms in that big new stadium in Las Vegas. Different uniforms. More losses than they'd like these two teams to have. BYU at 4-1, Notre Dame at 2-2, but a chance for either Notre Dame to rebound or BYU to start making its way back up the rankings. So nice game here between the two big independents in D1 football. Number 6, USC is 5-0. They're hosting Washington State at 4-1 on Fox. This is a sneaky big football game. USC had its first turnover of the season last week. So USC, BYU, San Jose State, and TCU are the only teams with only one turnover this season. So that actually explains a lot as far as TCU's success and San Jose State's surprising start as well. The Cougars smothered California 28-9 last week, and they feel a surprisingly good defense. They've got 18 sacks on the season. USC has 19. It's kind of surprising they've been able to get home with a lot of question marks on the defensive front coming into the season, but that's, I believe, 6th and 7th. They're tied for 6th and 7th in sacks. Top 8 certainly for both teams in the country. So they're able to get after the quarterback. Especially surprising since Caleb Williams is able to maneuver out of the pocket there for the Trojans. So will all these weapons be able to move the ball down on the Cougars, or will it be one of those games where they're able to keep it close? And will Cameron Ward be able to make the smart decisions to keep them in this football game? Because they had Oregon on the ropes. I believe they were up 2 touchdowns or 12 points with 4 minutes left in that game and absolutely blew it. Poor play calling, stopping the clock when they didn't need to, and just a bad throw to end the game on a pick 6 in that game. So will they be able to head into California here and give USC a real fight? I certainly think that they have a chance to possibly pull the upset here. USC again, only 1 turnover on the year, one of the top teams in terms of sacks, and a potent offense. In Washington State, a little sneaky, good defense. Quarterback that came in from Incarnate Word's been hanging in there pretty well. And sneaky good game here on Fox in 7:30. Staying in the 7:30 time slot, Kansas State is ranked 20th. They're 4-1, and they're heading to Iowa State, a 2-2 Cyclone team there on ESPNU. I have this as a higher watch team. Adrian Martinez is not a very effective passer, but he's rushed for over 300 yards and 7 rushing touchdowns against Oklahoma and Texas Tech the past couple of weeks. The Wildcats are averaging 5.7 yards per pass and 6.1 yards per carry. His running numbers are just blowing all these stats out of whack. It's Service Academy numbers. Now, Iowa State lost to Kansas last week 14-11 in just a sleepy game. The Jayhawks don't have a real great defense, so it was a little surprising. Deckers at quarterback is still completing almost 70% of his passes and seems to be a good quarterback, but the offensive line seems to be having some issues and is really holding back that offense. Kansas State is only 31% conversion rate on 3rd downs, and Iowa State is 45%. That is a big discrepancy. Again, it seems to be these big plays. Martinez moving his feet, able to get out of the pocket. That's really making the offense go for Kansas State right now. Can Iowa State kind of buckle down and cause some problems for him? And we'll see. We'll see if Iowa State can effectively knock them off here and have an upset over Kansas State, which is very much relying on the feet of Adrian Martinez and the legs right now. The other game I have at 7:30, I have demoted after realizing how ugly it's going to be. But Iowa's 3-2. They're playing at Illinois, who's 4-1. It's on the Big Ten Network. This is the number 1 and number 3 defensives in the country. And number 1 is not Iowa. It is Illinois. They're really, really good. They're really good. And they have, a competent running back, competent quarterback. And this is just a really good football team in the Fighting Illini. Iowa, I don't think, has completed a pass over 20 yards in the air this season. So I'm not sure that they're going to be able to really compete in this ball game. But Illinois I like a lot. And this is going to be near unwatchable football. The Illini could be moving to 5-1 here on the Big Ten Network. Games just worth noting: at 7 o'clock, Air Force at 4-1 is heading to Utah State, who's 1-4. That's on FS1. Can Air Force continue to roll and be a leader in the Mountain West as a surprise team this year? James Madison is 4-0, has the number 1 defense in the country. They're heading to Arkansas State. The Red Wolves are 2-3. That is on the NFL Network. Can James Madison stay undefeated as a surprise team this year in its first year at this level of football? Appalachian State's playing at 7 o'clock. They're 3-2. They're playing Texas State at they're 2-3. That's on the ESPN Plus platform. 7:30. Number 5 Clemson is 5-0. They're playing Boston College. They're 2-3. It's been a tough year for Boston College. This is on ABC, and I don't think Boston College will be able to hang. The offensive line has had issues. Phil Jokic came back off of injury last season to boost his draft stock, and it's not gone so well for him. Also at 7:30, South Carolina's 3-2 now. They're playing at Kentucky. Kentucky's 13th. They're 4-1. It's on the SEC Network. Kentucky has to be a little careful here. Nothing is expected from a South Carolina team who's only beaten Georgia State, Charlotte, and South Carolina State this season. They've taken some time off to prepare for this game. They've thumped by Georgia, and they were thumped by Arkansas State, although they put up some points on that defense. So it's entirely possible that South Carolina is able to give this Kentucky team, which has struggled a bit protecting their quarterback, Will Levis, and maybe push the defense a little bit. It wouldn't be surprising if they hang around. Kentucky's less than a touchdown favorite at home against the South Carolina team, so you may have to check in and see if they're able to survive. I don't want to say an upset, but a frisky South Carolina game. That could be interesting on the SEC Network. Also at 7:30, Wake Forest is ranked 15th. They're 4-1. Again, only because of that double overtime loss at Clemson. They're looking like a really solid team there in the ACC. They're hosting Army at 1-3. Always difficult to prepare for the service academies. That's on ESPN. And at 8 o'clock, getting to our few 8 o'clock games here. So on a kind of smaller slate, Coastal Carolina's 5-0. They're heading to Louisiana Monroe. That's a 2-3 ball club. That's on ESPN Plus. Coastal Carolina trying to stay undefeated. And the big one is going to be on CBS. It's not big on my list. Alabama's number 1. They're 5-0. They're hosting Texas A&M, who's 3-2. And of course, there's all the chatter in the preseason. Nick Saban making comments about basically Jimbo paying to get his players, which is part of the system now, but you're supposed to wait till your players are on campus effectively to get them endorsement deals, and there's a lot of gray area in that involved depending on what state you're in and all kinds of different things. But Jimbo took big offense to that and came out firing with a whole press conference of his own. A lot of bad blood here, at least particularly on Jimbo's side. I'm not sure about Saban's side, but with how ineffective Texas A&M has been, Alabama certainly got struggles of its own. We don't know if Bryce Young will play. I'm not sure he needs to. Jamar Gibbs, the running back, could just go off on Texas A&M's defense, which gave up over 6 yards per carry against Mississippi State last week and looked terrific. I would personally look at leaving Bryce Young off the field if I could and just crushing Texas A&M without him personally. And I'm not too worried about that. But that'll be the CBS big game, Alabama and Texas A&M. But I think that'll get out of hand regardless of whether Bryce Young plays coming off his injury against Arkansas last week or not. But the bigger game on the 8 o'clock slate is Florida at 4-1. They'll be traveling to North Carolina to play NC State. NC State ranked 14th. They're 4-1. This will be on the ACC Network. Both teams licking their wounds here. Florida State was pretty soundly beat by Wake Forest last week. The Demon Deacons had a solid lead and just muted the Florida State offense here that did not have such a great day. They had to score a touchdown or a 2-point conversion to keep a more respectable score in the fourth quarter. NC State, of course, just all kinds of problems on offense after bringing back a great quarterback in Devin Leary, and they just don't quite have the juice that they did last season. Leary's completing 62% of his passes, and it's just not a great offensive outlet for NC State this season. So two teams really trying to lick their wounds here. two of the better teams in what's been an ugly ACC, and one of them's going to come out on the other end of a 2-game loss, 2-game losing streak. So not great in that perspective, but this should be a solid football game. The defense for NC State is solid. They have a 45% third down conversion rate, which is what you want to see out of a really good football team. NC State's favored by a field goal over them, but they should be able to move the football with a good quarterback here in Jordan Travis. 66% completion percentage is a little concerning, but the defense should be able to do enough to keep NC State questioning what they're doing, and they're converting on 48% of their third downs. So some comparable, I think, statistics, all things considered, for these two teams and their journeys here, and should be an interesting football game to see which one comes out on top. Now, your evening slate is a little bit lighter this week, not quite as exciting. The Pac-12 Network takes away one of the better football games, unfortunately. The 9 o'clock, number 12, Oregon at 4-1 at Arizona, who is 3-2. The Ducks are only favored by 13 points with a whopping 70.5 over-under. So that puts the score around 42-28. So points are expected. The Ducks are scoring 35 points per game through their last 3. The Wildcats aren't very good, but they've been doing enough to win some football games. While Oregon, just despite the box scores and the stat lines, has some struggles, and you just can't rely on Bo Nix. They were lucky to win the Washington State game. They absolutely collapsed. The Cougars did in that game, and Stanford has a lot of issues, but the Ducks still gave up 27 points there, and Bo Nix did not play particularly well, so it's not strange to expect the Wildcats to poke some holes in this defense and maybe keep up with the Oregon Ducks for a little bit, so keep an eye on that one. At 9:45, Fresno State, who is 1-3, they'll be playing at Boise State, who's 3-2 on FS1. Fresno State is still without its captains on both sides of the ball. Jake Haener at quarterback, Evan Williams at safety, and a few others. They lost to UConn 19-14 last week, tying back into the who is good theme. You think the Mountain West favorite, even without its top 2 players, would muster enough to slip past the Huskies, but that was not the case. Boise State was down 13-0 to San Diego State last week and outscored the Aztecs 35-0 in the second to secure the blowout. I'm not sure who's starting at quarterback there, with freshman Sam Vidlek and Talon Green both throwing a few passes, and neither were very exciting to watch in the past couple of weeks here. So who knows? Boise State has a top 10 defense, which explains why their games are so horrifically boring to watch, with the inept offense on the other end. So this is going to be a not fun game to watch, unfortunately, between two teams that are expected to be in competition for the Mountain West. At 10:30, speaking of grossness, you will have Hawaii at 1-4 at San Diego State. The Aztecs are 2-3, as I just stated. This is on the CBS Sports Network. San Diego State had less than 300 yards of offense in 4 of the past 5 games this season. Less than 300 yards of total offense in 4 or 5 games this season. The exception was against FCS level Idaho State, where they put up 38% of their total offensive production for the season. They've had less than 200 yards twice, including 114 against Boise State last week. Hawaii lost to New Mexico 45-26 last week, a New Mexico State team that's gone down to Nevada, UTEP, and Florida Atlantic. So this is just disgusting. I don't even have words anymore for this. Now at 11 o'clock, for us normal folk, Oregon State at 3-2 will be heading to Stanford, who's 1-3 on ESPN. Sounds completely unappetizing, but this will be the top game available on all networks. The Beavers beavered and have had 8 turnovers the past 2 games, preventing them from obtaining wins against good competition. But they're still making a leap. This is still a solid football team, a solid defense. They need to cut down all those turnovers. Chance Nolan's still a solid quarterback. They just can't throw picks like they have been. Stanford isn't particularly good offensively, and they will have to make moves against this Beaver defense. So this is potentially another gross game, but the Cards have been able to move the ball despite poor red zone performance this season and turnovers. So it's possible that they could stay in this game and pull an upset. So this could be an interesting game as well, if both teams are able to clean it up a little bit. Could be a roller coaster, but again, this is one of the more exciting games that is on. Tanner McGee, we're officially getting NFL mock drafts now that we're nearing the halfway. This will be about the halfway point in the season, and he is currently the number 1 quarterback on NFL draft charts. So just keep that in mind, even though this team is 1-3. But Oregon State at 3-2, visiting the Stanford Cards on ESPN at 11 o'clock as your nightcap this Saturday. All right, here are your top watches for Week 6 of the college football season. Your must-watch is the 3:30 game, number 11 Utah and number 18 UCLA. Again, a lot of games have lost their luster. The Red River rivalry between Oklahoma and Texas, the Texas A&M and Alabama game, the North Carolina-Miami game. We've just got a lot of big games on the slate that have lost a lot. BYU, Notre Dame, Washington, and Arizona State. Just a lot of games that aren't as exciting. Ohio State and Michigan State. I mean, you can just keep going on down the line. But this one is a big game with big possible repercussions. If Utah takes a loss, maybe they don't make the Pac-12 championship game or the playoffs. If UCLA takes a loss, maybe they don't make the Pac-12 championship game. Maybe they could still make the playoffs. If Utah and USC were to make the Pac-12 championship game, for example, or Oregon was in the mix. So the Pac-12, I think, is going to have a pathway for a couple of teams, at least for now, to make the playoffs. Big 12 might possibly knock itself out, especially if TCU or Oklahoma State starts to take a loss. If Clemson goes down, it could be over, period, for the ACC. One loss there, and they might not be in the conversation with other one-loss teams due to the strength of schedule. And the SEC, who knows with Georgia and Alabama at this point, if that's still a two-bid conversation. So the Pac-12, I think this could be a big game between the two of the top 4 teams in that conference there. And it should be exciting too. My audible, as far as switching off of the current slate onto something more interesting, is that 4 o'clock North Carolina-Miami game. Again, one that's lost a lot of its sheen, but that is on ESPN2. Will we get a lot of points? Will we get 2 quarterbacks going at it? Drake May and Tyler Van Dyke. Will Miami, coming off their bye week, look a little bit more competent on both sides of the football? And this is easily one you can flip to outside of the Utah-UCLA game. Maybe Oregon State, Texas Tech isn't quite as exciting, and it's a little bit later slate out of a bunch of games. So that's one you can easily flip to see what's going on. Underrated, I thought about this one quite a bit, but I went on the noon slate. I went with Florida hosting Missouri on ESPNU. This could have repercussions for both teams quite a bit. It's not that we thought Florida under Billy Napier in year 1 would really rise up, but Anthony Richardson is finally looking like he can throw the ball a little bit the past 2 weeks, but he really doesn't want to take a loss at home here to Missouri, even though they're looking like a decent team. But again, there's an alternate reality where Missouri actually beat Georgia last week and held onto the football crossing the goal line against Auburn the week before, and they're like a 5-1 team ranked number 8 in the country. So that's crazy to think about, but they may have a real defense here. They may give Florida some problems. Can Anthony Richardson problem solve and the Florida Gators kind of progress with their season here? We'll see. That's the nooner. Florida hosting Missouri at noon is my underrated pick on ESPNU. Now my check-in, just like take a peek, see how things are going, is at 7:30 on the SEC network. That's number 13 Kentucky hosting South Carolina. How is this going to go? South Carolina hasn't beaten anyone. They've struggled on both sides of the football a little bit. Can Spencer Rattler move the ball a little bit against this Kentucky defense? The offensive line for Kentucky has been horrible. Will Levis has really had to come up with the plays. They had turnovers against Ole Miss last week. If South Carolina can put up some points, they can stay in the football game. So I think this is one you should check in to see if we have a possible upset brewing at some point. Small screen game. Now, one of the easier picks is to go with UTSA and Western Kentucky That's an ESPN Plus game at 6 o'clock if you're able to access it. Otherwise, my backup is Tulane hosting East Carolina at 3:30 on ESPNU. Again, Tulane, a great defense there, has been really coming out on the good side of a few ball bounces and looks like a good football team. And East Carolina, good quarterback there. It's a pretty good all-around football team out of the American Conference, and that should be a great football game. And finally, your late night snack. The easy pick is Arizona hosting Oregon. Can the Wildcats force some mistakes and get the Ducks? I think it's entirely possible, but since that's on the Pac-12 network, which is less accessible, if you can't get that one, then keep an eye on the Stanford and Oregon State game. That could be more intriguing, particularly with Tanner McGee appearing at the top of a lot of NFL mock drafts now that they are starting to be released. That is on ESPN at 11 o'clock. So thank you very much for tuning in for this week's draft guide, and I will catch you down the road.
All my blessings, 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 all my blessings.
I need my blessings every penny. Daily counting every single one, I'm seeing plenty. Level up and watch that beat turn into